We who live so far apart that we rarely see more of one another than the blue smoke of each other's chimneys are never at ease without the feel of the forest on every side. Room to breathe, to expand, to develop, as well as to hunt and to wander at will. The nature of the mountaineer demands that he have solitude for the unhampered growth of his personality, wing room for his eagle heart. No one can understand the attitude of our Highlanders toward the rest of the earth until he realizes their amazing isolation from all that lies beyond the blue, hazy skyline of their mountains. There are still people who remember. Mr. Herb Clabo, raised on Roaring Fork. Mr. Lem Ownby, the last person still living back of beyond. Mrs. Lucinda Ogle, whose values of yesterday make today worth living. Uncle Eb Whaley carries Greenbrier memories of the time when thousands of people lived on the creek. Orville Porter, working with the park today on the land his family farmed. Zenith Whaley guided the first park naturalist into the highest parts of the Smokies.
Seemed like man gets to thinking about it, we're always talking about the good old days. And you've heard the expression, we live back in the good old days. Well, that's right. It may be good old days 100 years from now. I don't know, looking now. But it ain't nothing like it used to be when I was a boy. Although we did hit it hard. You talk about money. Money is just about something that you didn't have. We had to work.
And then, of course, we go hopping rocks back through the Jungle Brook part. That's why we named it Jungle Brook, because there's so many little brooks and then so many big boulders to hop over. And we children used to, when my brothers and sisters and all cousins and us would get here, we'd see how long we could stay off of the ground without stepping on the dirt. This is a log cabin that my grandparent Ogles owned, and of course they built. And we called it, they first built the first house when they first married, and as their family got larger, they built the other one, and we always used to call it this house in the t'other. So Granny would say, go over in the t'other house and get me this or that. And then when kith and kin came, the whole place was loaded with people, and Granny would let me sleep in this bed, and you'd have to get in on this end, and I could look out the one little window and look out over the mountains down, and I'd wonder what all in the world it could be for little folks like me out over those mountains. And then I could see the lightning as it flashed and watch storms go by.
About 3 months out of the year is about all we got to go to school. Because when it really set in and got bad, and most of us had to help Dad and work for the family to keep something to eat, you know. We'd go to school about 3 months out of the year, and the rest of the time we'd farm a little. And
see, we all depended on wood, too, up there. And there was no coal, there was no oil, there was nothing except firewood, you might say. So if a person got sick with the flu or got sick with something that he couldn't do his own wood getting, then we would all gather up and get him wood up, maybe enough to do him a week or so. Maybe in that time we'd hope that he would be out. Then when we'd come to our farming, we find that help one another with the crops. Then maybe if it's us, why, they would come with their horses and come with their plows and hoes. And
now people use that. If you're measles, sick, bad, they'd give it to you for medicine. They'd make what they call a ginger stew. And if you had the measles, they'd make you a ginger stew and put a little whiskey in it, and that'll break them measles out on you right now. But if you got rattlesnake bit or copperhead, that's all they give you then. You drink that whiskey and never know the person to die. My dad-in-law made it, but we made it mostly for our own use. If you got bit back before that and since, all you drank was moonshine whiskey. And the government still just, they'd let you have a run of still if you paid license on it. Down there's about 3 miles from us. There's a man named Jim Newcomb run the still, the first one we ever had. Well, when the state and Oxford they voted the whole state dry, they'd cut them all out. Well, we had to make a little to do without any whiskey.
And you had to make most of your corn with a hoe. You could plow it in places, you could plow it a furrow or two in the road, help you out a whole lot. Hit it hard. Well, I had plenty of strength then. I didn't mind it too bad. Not all I knowed.
If you're going to fox hunting, of course, you go at the high tops so you could hear the dogs, you see. You only go hunting for fox to hear your dogs. And they did have, or we had, sometime we'd have as high as 4 dogs, which all had a different voice. And then when you got all 4 dogs strung out after fox, you've never heard nothing, I'd say. It's more like old harp singing than anything I've ever heard, because all of them different voices, you know, and all of them just a squalling like you's beating with a stick. And we learned to like it. It was actually music now, music to our ears, to hear our dogs run a fox. Well, if we wanted to possum hunt, why, of course, we had to go in a different territory. We'd have to hit the hollers, you see, get down in the lowlands. And we had a dog that would run a bear, and then when she'd get at a bear, she'd change her voice. The minute that she smelled the bear, we knowed exactly what she's smelling. In the 15-year period, we had caught around 3 to 4 bear. But they'd caught a whole lot more than that of cattle of ours and sheep, because they would, we kept sheep back in the mountains the same as did cattle. Well, bear would get a hunger for sheep or something. He'd just keep after it and run and keep on till he did catch it the same way as the cattle. But we got on the last till we get a few of them in return. So some of them wonder, I guess, why you won't want with a bear, but I don't know. I'd prefer him over a horse. If you go talking about meat, I've eaten quite a few of them. In my lifetime, I killed 2 bear. And both of those bears was used for food, because really I couldn't tell much difference between the bear and beef. Except I was told some of them, if you found a big black hair, it is bear, and if it is red, more than likely it's beef, and that's about the difference between them.
Then when I was about 14-year-old, I guess, I was getting close to 16, we lived up here, and then it was a bear back of our, when we went out to milk, there's a big old bear there, and I said, Dad, I didn't know you'd bought a black calf, and he looked up and he says, it's not, and says it's coming out the cow. So he took the cow and put her in the stable, and we run to the house, and then he got his bear dogs and went over and got a neighbor, and they took off after it and run it back on top of Bullhead Mountain. But then the next weekend, when we were coming in, why, there's a bunch of boys with their hound dogs and the guns and everything coming in across through the Sugarland Gap. And they came in there toward our house, and the boy come up, the young fella came up to the door, and I said, Wiley, where did you see that bear here? We're thinking about having us a race. So the next week, Crockett Maples brought me a letter. Our mailman brought me a letter from Ernest. And he said he kept bothering the mailman, wanting to know what Wiley Oakley's oldest daughter name was. And so he finally wrote me a letter, and Dad said, you can't be writing them Sugarland boys, you're too young. But I kid afterwards and say, that's how I met Ernest. He come a bear hunting and found a deer instead of a bear, and that was dear me.
Everybody on Roaring Fork, the best I remember at my time, did farm, because it's the only way they had to make a living. There was no other way except the farming. There was 1 or 2 jobs, other sawmill jobs, but other than that, it was farming. And most everybody did raise a garden for their table use, and they raised the same vegetables actually as they raise now as garden vegetables, except their breads, of course, and the bread was made from corn. And most of us up there did eat cornbread twice and a lot of times 3 times a day, because if we got any flour, we had to go to Gatlinburg and carry it in on our back. See, there's no way of transportation except walking or riding horseback. And of course, if we got groceries, which we did have to have some out of town, sugar and salt, baking powders and soda, stuff like that, we had to carry out of Gatlinburg, but we'd walk down and carry it back on our back. And but the corn, we would have it ground at little mills, you see, and my mother would use the sifter sieve to sift it. And the vegetables then, as she learned to prepare vegetables, we'd usually make us a big crock full of sauerkraut and pickled beans. And it's the old mountain type of eating, you might say. My mother, she done chair bottoming around the house. My father usually always we'd be off in the fields maybe working, and her spare time or when the ground was too wet to work. The women worked in the field back then the same as the men. You didn't have to be grown before you started work back then. Never knew big enough to lift the hoe up to let it fall on the weed. Why, then we'd break him to work and get him started. Anyway, we used to pick up chestnuts, quite a few chestnuts back through the heads, back through the fir head of Baskins and round on the foot of the round top. Quite a chestnut orchard. There's wild. They wasn't set out. They grew wild, but anyway, we'd go and after a windstorm, and it'd blow these chestnuts out, and we'd pick up chestnuts by the bushels. And my father usually take them to town, and they would swap the chestnuts in and get us shoes to wear. We usually go to school till up Christmas before ever we'd have any shoes to wear. And of course, them chestnut burrs were something else to walk through. If you ever walk through chestnut burrs barefooted, you've done something. Very little money made back there, because everybody depended on the corn for a living and on the corn crop, and there wasn't much money. So if you got any money, then you got to take something besides corn and trade it. And we could, of course, everybody back then had their chickens. You see, they'd sell their butter and eggs and pick up a lot of groceries. We'd come to town and keep, although we did keep some meat, and we would buy meat. You see, maybe this other feller down here, he'd grow a little extra crop of corn, and he would take a middling of meat out to town and sell it, out to Gatlinburg and sell it, and we'd go out to Gatlinburg and we'd buy about a quarter of a middling.
Granny and us would start out early in the spring. You know, you didn't have too much green things during the winter. So as early as we could in the spring, we'd start out to find what we could to eat, you know, and make as we say, a mess of greens. And there's a different kind of mess that was all mixed up, the reason we called it a mess. She'd pick out to show us the things to stoop and cut with an old knife that Grandpap Ogle had made years ago. And we'd get down and cut all these little green shoots, and it was fascinating. By the time that apron lap was good and full, and we had plenty to cook when we got in. Of course, we'd gather a little bit of the little tender shoots of dock and plantain, field cress, dandelion, greens. But now, when we gathered poke, we usually used that as a separate dish. When we went out with Granny, we had enough to do quite a few people before we got back home. We'd go in the woods, and then we'd go along the streams, and then we'd go into the fields. And by the time we got home, we had quite a bit for everybody and the neighbors.
They did come a sawmill up there, you see, and I was a big overgrown boy at that time. And talking to some people, I told them my first job that I ever earned a dime at, as best to remember, was doodling sawdust at a sawmill. I went down and asked the man if I could work, and he said, "Well, ain't got nothing you might do except could you doodle dust?" And I said, "Well, I guess I could. I never have been spoiled and never have." So he put me on and that was the big saw, circle saw going around.
Dad worked for the Little River Lumber Company till the park bought him out. And I've watched the logging operations go on, much of it. I was well acquainted with the overhead skidders, well acquainted with the old railroad trains, and all of them things. I saw them working. Then the skid roads that they logged the logs out of the mountains with large teams of horses. When I was a boy, I'd slip off from Mom and go back on the logging trails to get to watch the logs come out, to get to watch those logs. You could hear them a-bumping. They're coming a mile before they got to you. You could hear them a-bumping again when they're coming out of the mountains. But as far as anybody getting hurt, I don't remember of anybody getting hurt except when they had the great piles of logs piled up and they had the skidder, what they called a skidder, that they loaded them with on these cars. And the log pile broke loose one time and rolled over the tong hooker. In other words, it had a man that hooked tongs. They called him one that hooked tongs. And he got hurt pretty bad at that. Then the train ran away one time and killed a man in the caboose. But it was a very big operation and not a whole lot of fatalities on it. As far as I know, it was done very, very safely, most of it. They were paid $2 and about $2.40 a day. And they cut the timber with crosscut saws. I guess you know what a crosscut saw is. And a lot of the timber was so big that they had to get these large 8-foots. They've got 8-foot crosscut saws. And they had to get the big, large 8-foot saws to cut a lot of this timber in these mountains. These poplars or tulips got large, and the big hemlock was really got large too. And it was all cut by hand. Two men sawed, and they had what they called a lead chopper. And he'd go ahead and look the way that tree was going to fall, and he'd chop a lead in that tree. And the men with the saw, in turn, would cut that tree down. But most of the timber cutting was contracted out. Men would go in and contract it, then he'd hire him a bunch of men, and go in and cut it out.
Be a boy in Greenbrier, I didn't know at that time, but I was born and raised up till I was 15 years old in the most beautiful place in the world to me, but I didn't know it at that time. But I realize it now, and have for the last few years. When I had to move out of this park, I had a grudge, you know, for some time. But then I got over that when my eyes began to be opened. I began to wake up then to the beauty of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park that was once my home, and now I still cherish it as the grandest place on earth.
Here we have the remains of the little honeymoon house. When the eldest of the family would marry, they built him a home back here. And later, when the next one to marry, then he moved back, and that one had to go hunt him another place. Till there was, I believe, 4 or 5 of the boys and my uncles. But Mom didn't get to live here. She had to go with Dad to his family. So we had to move back up on Piney Mountain. That's over in that direction. Oh, several miles, about 3 miles back in there, and that was back and beyond. But of course, and that's what we call where Dad used to say we lived at Scratch Britches Mountain. But then later we moved back here closer to Granny's. That was when I was older. I said I'd hopped rocks and played here so much. It was one of the happiest times of my life.
In the merry month of May, when the green barks lay were swelling, sweet William Green on his deathbed lay, for the love of Audrey Ellen. When he took sick, I was very ill. He sent for Audrey Ellen, but when she came, was all she said. bride was buried in the churchyard here. She was buried in the choir, but out of his grave grew a red, red rose. Out of hers grew a fire. They grew and grew to the steeple top, till they could grow no higher. And are they twined in a true love's knot, the red rose and the fire.
You're at the gateway to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Stay tuned for some features which may help make your visit more enjoyable.